You heard Dr. Fulner mention PH as our partner in this project. PH is Chief Advisor to Peking University Center for New Structural Economics, Justin's organization. He's an entrepreneur in the information technology, cinema, culture, and media industries in China, and he's chairman of two public companies in Hong Kong to that end, two companies being Nanhai Corporation and Sino-Eye Technology, which together have more than 16,000 employees in China. Beyond his roles in business, PH has invested a great deal of time and energy and relationship building, I should add, into scholarships and the issues surrounding understanding of China and other major countries' economic policies. PH received his PhD from Peking University and ultimately founded the Chinese Cultural Research Center there. He's also founder of the Center for U.S.-China Relations at Tsinghua University. Here in the U.S., on this visit, PH launched the China and the West Economic Dialogues jointly with Columbia University in New York before they headed down here. This is a series of annual forums to foster substantive debate and scholarship about China, the United States, and other countries with a diverse set of theoretical and evidence-based perspectives. We're very grateful for PH's partnership, and we're glad to have him here today to close our program. So with that, let me invite you up.
Thank you, Walter. I must say the cooperation with the Heritage Foundation has been pretty interesting because at the beginning, we were trying to find could there be anybody that has a very different idea from how we look at U.S.-China relationships. And Heritage is very high up on the list. So we were jokingly at one time see whether we can have a hawk and hawk discussion between people from Beijing and people from the U.S. And we end up talking about a lot of the things, and this is one of the results that we are holding this program. The problem is that in the last close to 10 years, I participated in dialogue between the U.S. and China. I find it interesting that in the last 10 years, the changes is pretty significant. Because originally, there was a lot of misunderstanding, I will use the word, or even lack of understanding about how China behaves or how China functions. And recently, I find that is resurging. Reason is very simple. I heard a lot of the speakers today talks about the Deng era. Or the post-Deng scenario. Maybe that is the reason, because in the last 30-something years, people usually understand China through the reform and open up by Deng Xiaoping. He initiated that in about close to 40 years ago. And people start getting used to it. But in the last few years, and Xi Jinping has put up a pretty different kind of structure. The trajectory on how China will evolve clearly is changing. And we can hear that today, especially from the second panel. I think 5-6 years ago, when I was visiting the US talking about the possible coming up of the Xi Jinping time, not too many people think of it as anything unusual. They will just say, oh, okay, this is after Jiang Zemin, this is after Hu Jintao, now you have Xi Jinping. So it will continue to be the same way of development. Clearly, today, it is different. So there is a new way of talking about it. There's talking about post-Deng era, or the arrival or the dawn of the Xi era. But I think the idea of the discussion with, or the dialogue between a lot of the US and Chinese scholars or think tanks is that there are a very different way of looking at the evolution or the development in China. And the reason for all these confusions or the ways keep changing is that China does represent or approach to the level of a paradigm shift for how we look at a lot of things happening, both economic and international. I think that today's the two panels gives a very good combination because two of them are really looking at things in a very, very different way. But are they really different? I don't think so. When we talk about the globalization of Chinese characteristic, when we talk about the 19th Party Congress and what happened to the Chinese foreign policy after that, and I don't think there are two subjects if we look at the Belt Road Initiative, because the Belt Road Initiative basically epitomized both issues. And if we look at it not in a prejudiced way, maybe we could find it easier to understand what is the Chinese foreign policy after the 19th Party Congress, or how is globalization under the China definition. I will simplify the three aspects of way to look at the difference between China and the USA. Because in the last 30 or 40 years, one major situation happened in the Chinese decision-making process or culture or the governing culture is that ideology no longer play a very, very important role. I mean, I'm sure if you look at the Chinese Communist Party's tradition, ideology is a very important part of it, especially during the Cultural Revolution and before that. But nowadays, I wouldn't use the word pragmatic, but at least ideology is not the prime objective. Of course, the Communist Party is still a Marxist-Leninist party, but as far as its relationship with the world or economic issue, I don't think that plays that important a role, okay? So ideology has no longer been a very important element in the Chinese decision-making process. And then the second part of it, I believe that it illustrates quite a bit by a lot of the panelists today already, that alternative thinking, I would call it the doctrine of alternative thinking, has become a very important part of the Chinese way of speaking on things. And I think Deng has proven to you that it could be very different from Mao. And spend a few more years on China, you will see Xi Jinping is very different from Deng. And some of the panelists already talk about how the old Tao Guang Yang Hui now not becoming a very proactive way of involving China itself into the world. I think when we talk about alternative thinking, in fact, yesterday we were in New York and we were having the discussion with the Columbia University team, and Jack Lew was there yesterday, and the former Treasury Secretary. We had a pretty long discussion about how China coming into the international arena and how China should really respect the norm of the existing international order. And then we talk about it in such a way that he talks about in such a way that there's really a norm, definable and well scripted, and about how that norm is supposed to be. In fact, I think everybody should understand the norm has been keep evolving. It has been evolving for a very, very long time, whether between the British and the American, the Germany, the Japanese, and the Soviet Union and the US, and nowadays, and China and the USA. I think the norm has always been evolving. It is not something that's like a status quo. I like to use an example between Apple and Google. If you look at Apple's iPhone, you have the iOS. You have the Google coming up with the Android. But please, are they communicating? They are fighting. They have very different standards. They're not the same. They have a very different business model. But at the same time, they're really communicating. They're benefiting everybody. If Microsoft could have his operating system successful, I don't think it would be that bad if we have 3 operating systems in the market and they communicate with each other. So I think having an alternative way of looking at things is something China is telling the world that maybe we shouldn't be such a monolithic world. It should be a more diversified one. It shouldn't be China changing the norm. It should be everybody changing all the norms. And when everybody is improving, it doesn't mean there is no law and order. I don't think so. The third aspect, I think I would advise people when they look at China. people always underestimate the meaning of the word reform. I think if we look at it purely as a description of what is happening in China, or the collective name of a series of program or policy, what you have been doing, I think the word reform should be taken more seriously. Now, people talk about the 18-party Congress, come and go. And I think a lot of people also understand that in the third party plenum that the Xi Jinping, since 18-party Congress, he talks about a lot of the deepening reform in China. In fact, the key theme of that paper was the reform of the governing system and the governing power of the ruling party. We call it the fifth modernization of China. The reason is, I'm sure a lot of you that knows about China, that China, since the 8th Party Congress in 1956 or 57, and there was the fourth modernization, which talks about defense, technology, industry, and agriculture, I think. But that part of reform was basically revived after the Cultural Revolution, and Deng Xiaoping's programs very much on that fourth modernization. A lot of people talk about that as the reform of the hard infrastructure, hard element in the society. The fifth modernization, I believe Xi Jinping proposed in the third plenum in the 18th Party Congress, is really to bring China, in the West you can call it soft power reform, soft power modernization, to bring China into the next stage of its development, which will more emphasize on institution, more emphasis on culture, more emphasis on how it interacts with everybody else. And that's why I think if we look at China's post-Cultural Revolution reform, is stay away from ideology or not being dogmatic about it, having an alternative thinking, and also at the same time charge ahead with reform and then deepening of reform, then you can understand the entire idea of China's economic development or its strategy internationally is really to create the best possible environment for China or Chinese to grow its potential, to exert its potential. I think the difference between the US and China, as illustrated today by two of the panels, is that we do have very significant difference in how we perceive the world. And I strongly suggest that let's not miss the point. And then the idea between having a dialogue between the West and China, whether it's between the Peking University with Heritage or Peking University's program now with Columbia University, is to really establish the platform that an open dialogue and open discussion about two very, very different group of people, that they can have a whole open-minded and inclusive way of looking at things. And I'm sure that in the same discussion I have with Jack Liu yesterday, is we were talking about infrastructure. We were asking, is the US lack of $1 trillion to do the infrastructure? Clearly not. You have a lot more than $1 trillion. Then what's the reason that even today you are talking about whether USA should be a part of the Belt and Road Initiative and take advantage of the infrastructure program that China is launching? Look at the Iraq war. How much money you spend there? You spend a lot. Look at the financial crisis in 2008. How much money you spend there? How much money you put on saving all these banks and all these financial institutions? How much money you spend in the auto industry to revive it? You spend a lot. I'm sure you have $1 trillion. So the difference there, when we were talking to Jack Liu yesterday, is that do we have the political determination, the political will? And that is the problem. I'm sure the difference between China and USA in the last 10, 20 years, or possibly in the next 10 years, is do we have the political will and determination to do it? I think what the panel has and our work with Heritage or Columbia and other think tank is that whether we could bridge the differences in looking at certain things. If we could do that, just like I said, we could be iOS and Android at the same time. So if that's the case, why not? And with that, I would like to end my remark, and I hope we will continue to work together with Heritage in the future endeavor. Thank you.
Okay, well, that adjourns our program. Thank you very much for joining us today.